Okay, here we are on the website, hsaexam.org/support/practice, and we are going to go through the answers to the first quiz for algebra data analysis, analyzing patterns and functions from 2009. So the question here, what are the zeros of the function? We know that the zeros are where the graph crosses the x-axis. So we look here, and we look here. So that is D. Okay, second question. Look at the pattern below. This pattern continues. What is the sixth term? These are the key. With these questions, you always want to pay attention to what term you're trying to find. That is usually one of the biggest mistakes that people make, even if you know what the pattern is. So here we go. We're looking at how do we get from 2.6 to negative 5.2. Well, if I decide that this is adding, okay, so let's say we're adding 2.6. How do we get the negative sign in there? The only way you can make that number negative is if you multiply it by a negative number, or I guess add or subtract something larger than itself. So if you look at the continuing pattern, 10.4 is double 5.2, 20.8 is double 10.4. And this problem of the negative sign means that we're multiplying by a negative number. So negative 5.2 times 2, negative 2, is going to be a positive 10.4. So we realize here that we're multiplying by negative 2. So we multiply negative 20 by negative 2, and we find that that is positive 41.6. And then we're trying to find the sixth term. So notice that's an answer, but that's not what we want, because we're going to multiply by 2 again, or negative 2 again, I'm sorry, and we're going to get a negative 83.2. So a lot of times you'll see the correct, what you think might be a correct answer. Just double check that it is, because again, that's a distractor. So our answer is negative 83.2. And next question. Look at the table below. Which of these equations describes the relationship between the x values and the y values? Well, for this one, we want to make sure that our x values are increasing by 1. And each time we have an increase of 1, so that's good. And so that means we're going to be able to look at a constant rate of change in our y values. So between 3 and 8, there's a plus 5. Between 8 and 13, plus 5. Between 13 and 18, plus 5. So for every 1 change in x, the y values go up 5, and that is the definition of a slope. And so that leads us to look at answer D for our solution. The table below shows a cubic relationship. Cubic means that you're going to cube the x value, or multiply it by itself 3 times. So if you notice, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8, 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, on and on and on. So we're going to figure out what is 7 times 7 times 7. You have calculators, this should do this pretty quick. We find that the answer is 343. So we go ahead, we fill that in with that value. And we can move on. So here's an expression question. The width and length in feet of a rectangular playground are x and x plus 2. A fence costs $17 per foot. So which of these expressions represents the cost in dollars to build a fence around? Alright, so a fence around. That's key, because that is the definition of perimeter. To find the perimeter of a rectangle, you have to add both of the sides twice, because they have 2 sets of equal sides. So one side is x, one side is x plus 2. That means this side is x, and this side is also x plus 2. So we have to add all 4 of those sides. and then multiply that by the cost of 17 feet. So we're looking at this one down here. Mark it, move on, and we'll clear the annotations. Look at the pattern below. The pattern continues. What's the value of y when x is 10? Another one of those. You got to be very careful of what you're looking at here. It's asking when x is 10. So figure out what the pattern is. So from 9 to 12, we've been increase of 3, increase of 5, increase of 7, increase of 9. So I hope it's obvious that we're looking at an increase of 2 every time that we're moving on to another y value. So if we continue the table, and don't be afraid to write all over the HSA. The test is there. You can write all over it. You're only turning in your answers. So the whole space is there for you to work. So here we're going to add 11. So that's going to make 44. Here we're going to add 13. So that's going to make 57. Here we're going to add 15. That's going to make 72. Add 17. 89. And add 19. 108. And so we look at our choices and make sure that that's actually fitting in there and I didn't make any errors adding. And we find that C is 108. Look at the function graph below. What is the range? The range is all of the y values that the function achieves. So looking at this graph, we're only paying attention to where this graph is physically in relationship to y. So notice this graph does not go below 0. So that means the y values are everything that's greater than 0. And we want to find the answer that represents that. So it's not all real numbers. It's not all whole numbers, because as you can see, the y value is not, or the graph is not dotted. To indicate that it only hits certain values. It's not just between 0 and 5 because you can see the arrows extend past that. So we know for a fact it's A. We're going to submit that. Look at the pattern below. If the pattern continues, what will be the 10th term? Again, 10th, not next. I know when you get into a test and you're not thinking as clearly as you normally would, sometimes you read that as next and just put the next term, and lo and behold, they do have the next term as an answer. You've got to be aware, not the next term. So it looks like we're having an increase of 7 every time. Let's just double check a few of them to make sure. So as long as the first 3 are 7, you can pretty much guarantee that the rest of these are 7 as well. So we're going to add 7. I'm going to make myself 5 more blanks for 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I might even want to put numbers down there just to make sure I don't go past what I'm supposed to do. Alright, so I add 7, that's 38. Add 7 again, that's 45. Add 7 again, 52. 7 is 59, and 7 is 66. So I find that C is our answer. Okay, look at the pattern shown below. If this pattern continues, what is the 6th term? Again, not next, 6th. So I'm going to make one spot for my 5th and one spot for my 6th, and I know I'm going to stop there. So it's looking like, to get from 2 to 6, I could add 4 or times 3. That's 2 different ways to get from 2 to 6. Alright, but if I know that 6 plus 4 is not 18, I know that's not going to work. But however, 6 times 3 is 18. And one more check, 18 times 3 is 54. So I'm going to multiply everything by 3 to get my next term. So 54 times 3 is going to be, we'll work it out here, I don't have a calculator. So you will have a calculator on the test. I'm sorry, why did I put 5? 162. Alright, and we're going to multiply 162 by 3, and that is going to be 486. So we can write that in. Wait, is it 486? It is. And sorry about that. I had a mental block there. So our Final answer is 486, and we can write that in with confidence. And submit it. All right, 3 to go. So, a company spends 2x plus $3,000 for materials. The cost of labor to make them is 3.2x plus $3,500. The expression has to represent the difference between the cost of labor and the cost of materials. Well, if you don't know anything about manufacturing, that's okay, because the key word here is difference. Difference means subtract. And if you recognize in the answers, we've only got plus, minus, multiply, and divide. All right, so B is our answer. However, to know a little bit more about it, if you're going to manufacture and sell something, you've also got to buy the materials. And so the cost of labor, the cost to put them together, but as opposed to the cost of the materials, our question is asking for the difference. So which one, you can find out which one costs more and by how much by finding the difference. So that's what we're looking at here. And so we're going to mark B, submit, and clear our annotations, and then do this question. So the relationship between x and y. All right, so it's the relationship between x and y. That's key. So we're looking across. What do you do to -1 to get +1? What do you do to 0 to get 0? What do you do? It's got to be the same rule every time. Well, I know it's not adding 0 because 0 plus 0 is 0. 1 plus 0 is 1. But -1 plus 0 would be a -1, and that's not the case here. All right, so this might be a multiplication. So let's try to multiply it by itself. -1 times -1 is +1. 0 times -1 is 0. 1 times 1, I'm sorry. Let me back that up, and I don't want to erase what I've done here. What can we do to x to get to y? All right, so we've found out that we can't add. So we're going to try to multiply, and we'll try to multiply by itself. So if we do 2 times 2, we find that's 4. 1 times 1, 1, 0 times 0, 0. -1 times -1 makes a +1. So if we multiply this x value by itself, we're going to find the y value. The way you represent something that's unknown, use a variable x. To multiply it by itself would be x times x, and x times x is x squared. So I apologize for the confusion of the first part, and we're going to mark our answer and move on. Okay, apologize again for the interruption of the announcements. All right, here's a recipe for a spice cake. The ratio of flour to milk is 3 to 1. That's important. What that means is, for every time you add 3 parts, it doesn't matter if it's a cup, tablespoon, a teaspoon, whatever. If you add 3 parts of flour, you got to add 1 part of milk. So let's say it's 3 cups. If it's 3 cups of flour, you got to add 1 cup of milk. If it's 3 tablespoons of flour, you got to add 1 tablespoon of flour or milk. So every time you add 3 of something of flour, you got to add 1 of the same measurement of milk. So what that means is, over here in our answers, we're looking for the flour to be 3 times more than the milk for every number in the table. Here, milk is 3 times more than the flour. That's not what we want. We want the flour to be 3 times more than the milk. So we look through. Oops, let me get those annotations out of there. B, 2 times 3 is 6. 5 times 3 is 15, 8 times 3 is 24, 10 times 3 is 30. I'm positive that's the answer, but we can go through and just check the last few, just to be sure. So here, definitely that's add 3, and in part D, it starts out adding 3, and then gets crazy after that, 6 and then 3 again. So we know for a fact it is B. So we'll put that, submit our answer, and be done with this quiz. Hopefully that helped, and there'll be more later.